again, and if anybody wants to sort of add more to it, please go ahead. But basically, it's sort of addressing the fact that in California, we essentially live in a bubble. We do live in a bubble. I think that we live in a bubble. I think that we don't the connection between cities and the rural communities we're insulated. We don't reach across as far as we should. We don't reach out as deeply as we should. So how do Californians, how can they most effectively have an impact on federal policy on a national level?
Yeah, I'll take a first crack. We talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So we've been studying this for about the past 5 years. My graduate student and I, we have something called the California Package, and others have written about this too, about the California Blueprint on Immigration, but a whole bunch of other policies, environmental policies, labor policies, et cetera. One thing, and I really like this idea of essentially taking Republicans at their word that they want to empower states and localities to say, great, so let's organize at that level. The thing that is important to note, and we had a convening about a year ago with funders and community organizations in California and then outside of California, it's really important to note that what's happened in California now is a result of about 2 decades of struggle and investment. It was not easy. It's not just that California is this weird place and then they just do weird things, right, or super liberal. We passed Prop 187 about 20 years ago, right? We passed Prop 209 20 years ago. We passed Prop 227 18 years ago. It took organizing, and not just in San Francisco and Los Angeles, but out where I am in the inland Southern California, Inland Empire, out in Central Valley. So it takes organizing outside of these dense urban areas, and to really change the narrative, it'll take investments by funders. So there are foundations here who have had a 10 to 20-year strategy. New York State can't do this, which is just shocking. So much of the pro-immigrant, pro-rights activity is centered in New York City that they're not as organized in upstate New York. So this is something that needs to happen in Georgia, right? Radiating out of Atlanta and organizing outside of Atlanta Metro. So this is something that it's not what California can do for these other places, but to really learn the right lessons from California, and not to just take it for granted that we're such a blue state that it comes very easily. It was a struggle, and it's a struggle that others also need to engage in, and it needs to be invested in.
I absolutely agree. And I think that there's a way that we need to articulate this that will resonate in other parts of the country and in other parts of the state, like the independent state of Jefferson up on the Oregon border. And without rolling my eyes, it's hard to talk about that, but to articulate it in terms of values, in terms of not despising people who are religious, in terms of family values, in terms of building communities, articulating as part of our building our community by protecting the people who live in our community and are contributors in our community. And finding, for instance, those evangelical churches that have good feelings and good thoughts about immigrants, and most of them do. Most of them were terribly conflicted in this last election. And it's about, well, some of it was about the abortion issue for them in a way that was not articulated in the national discussion at all. And they were disgusted by Trump, but they really feared abortion, and it became a really weird turn for them. But instead of despising them for having been Trumpies, building bridges to them and building on that sense of we are folks who take care of the people in our community and who value immigrants and who want to do good things together. I think that's an important task as we articulate this.
from minority politics, the first thing I want to say is that name calling is not a strategy. So if you're just name calling, that's not going to really change anything. It's going to heighten sort of the communication. I think one of the things that I noticed in this last election is it was an intellectual sort of battle between people who thought they were superior because of their education to people who might not have the same education. And the people, and inside the bubble that you might be in, California or DC, you sort of felt like, I know what's best for you because I know what's best. And the person you were sort of imposing that on had other thoughts. So it's important that we also reach out to those communities and understand what their concerns are to address them from their point of view. Because sort of telling them what's good for them never bodes well. And this country has a history of doing that to all type of minority groups, of saying, I know what you need this, right? And I think it also happened around the naturalization argument a little bit in circles, where some people were sort of saying, you gotta get all the way to naturalization, and some people might have been fine with work authorization. So I think the communication needs to start from the individual, from their perspective, and that's the way you remove the bubble, because inside the bubble you think, oh, we're all educated, this is great, this is the best solution, here you go, implement it. And the people outside are saying, look at you in the Ivy Tower telling me what I need to do and why I'm not sufficiently educated to make this decision for myself. That's not the best perspective.
I do think that the examples from California, both historically and currently, can be a teaching moment. But I do think that California has to be the example of fighting for justice. Like I was telling the story about Sho Tanimoto, my relative. You know, for Japanese Americans, how would we have stopped that? How would we have stopped that injustice? It would have taken people from California and other states standing up and saying, that's wrong, we're not going to allow it to happen, and we're going to do everything within our power to stop it. And that kind of example, to fight for our neighbors, to fight for our loved ones, I think that's the best thing California could do. If we cannot do that and we just talk about examples and history, we won't succeed. We really have to show the nation, these are our brothers and sisters. We're not going to let this go down, and we're going to fight together because we value them as human beings. But we have found in California that these folks are contributing. They're contributing to our economy. They're contributing to our culture. We can work out problems. Sure, there's problems. But unless we're fighting together, and that's the example, I guarantee you there'll be other states to follow that would just fall passively aside as these horrible things unfold.
So maybe we can take our president-elect at his word and say, stop it, and use that as a slogan, right? Because that's what he said. To all these people doing harm, stop it. But I think we could co-opt that slogan.